I drove 4 hours while recovering from major surgery, desperate for my mother's comfort. Instead, Margaret blocked the cabin doorway and told me I wasn't wanted. I didn't argue. I just left, drove home, and quietly initiated the nuclear option clause in the family trust they forgot I controlled. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The steering wheel felt like it was vibrating directly into my bones, sending little shockwaves of pain up my arms and settling deep in my chest. It had only been 10 days since the surgery, a partial thyroidectomy that had left me feeling hollowed out, shaky, and terrifyingly mortal. My doctor had advised bed rest, specifically instructing me to avoid stress. But when your mother calls you and says the family is gathering at the lake house for the weekend, you go. You go because you are the daughter who always shows up. You go because, in the hazy, narcotic aftermath of the operation, you convinced yourself that this time, things might be different. You convince yourself that seeing your stitches and your pale, trembling hands might finally trigger a maternal instinct that had been dormant for 3 decades. I pulled the car onto the gravel driveway, the crunch of stones under the tires sounding deafening in the quiet woods. My hands were slick with sweat as I put the car in park. I took a deep breath, wincing as the movement tugged at the incision site at the base of my throat, currently covered by a silk scarf I had carefully arranged to look fashionable rather than medical. The cabin, a sprawling, timber-framed beauty overlooking the water, looked idyllic. Smoke curled from the chimney. I could see the silhouette of movement behind the large bay windows. It was the house I had bought, the house I paid the property taxes on, the house where I had hoped to recover. I stepped out, my legs feeling like lead. It took me a moment to steady myself against the doorframe. I grabbed my small overnight bag, the weight of it seeming to triple since I packed it, and walked slowly toward the porch steps. The front door opened before I even reached the stairs. It was Margaret, my mother. She didn't come down the steps to help me. She didn't open her arms. She stood at the top of the landing, blocking the entrance with her body, a glass of white wine in her hand. She looked impeccable, as always, cashmere sweater, perfectly coiffed hair, not a single line of worry on her face. She looked at me, then down at my bag, and then back at my face. Her expression wasn't one of concern, it was one of mild irritation, like I was a delivery driver who had arrived during dinner. "You're late, Lauren," she said, taking a sip of her wine. I had to stop a few times," I managed to say, my voice raspy. The surgery had affected my vocal cords slightly, leaving me with a hushed, strained tone. The drive was harder than I thought. I took a step up. She didn't move. She just stared at me, her eyes cold and assessing. Behind her, I could hear laughter. I heard the booming voice of my brother, Julian, and the distinct clinking of glassware. "Well," Margaret sighed, swirling the liquid in her glass. "It's crowded in here. Julian brought his new girlfriend, and Patrick is using the guest suite for his gaming setup. We really didn't think you were actually coming, considering." She waved a hand vaguely at my neck. "You invited me," I whispered, confusion clouding my pain-riddled brain. "You called me." "I was being polite, Lauren," she snapped, her voice dropping to a hiss so the others wouldn't hear. "I didn't think you'd actually drag yourself out here looking like that." I stood frozen on the second step. "Mom, I just need to lie down. Please, I'm in pain." She looked at me for a long, agonizing silence. Then, she leaned forward, her face contorting into a sneer that I had seen 1,000 times in my childhood, but never with this level of venom. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You can come in, but don't get comfortable. Nobody really wants you here, Lauren. You're just a dampener on the mood. So if you're going to mope around and play the victim with your little scar, just stay in the back room." The words hit me harder than the scalpel had. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the timing. It was the realization that my physical agony meant absolutely nothing to the woman who gave birth to me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the hollowness in her eyes, the absolute lack of empathy. My grip on the overnight bag tightened until my knuckles turned white. The throbbing in my neck seemed to synchronize with the pounding of my heart. I realized in that second that no amount of money, no amount of sacrifice, and no amount of surgery would ever make me whore. Thy in her eyes. I didn't say a word, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I just nodded once. I turned around, walked back down the steps, and threw my bag into the passenger seat. As I climbed back into the driver's side, I saw her still standing there, watching me with a smug satisfaction, as if she had won a game I didn't know we were playing. I started the engine, my hands trembling violently now, not from weakness, but from a rage so pure it felt like it was cauterizing my wounds. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The drive back down the mountain was a blur of tears and adrenaline. I had to pull over 3 times, not because of the pain in my neck, but because I was hyperventilating so severely I was starting to see spots in my vision. I parked on the shoulder of a switchback, the valley spreading out below me in a tapestry of greens and golds. I gripped the steering wheel, gasping for air, forcing myself to regulate my breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It was a technique I used in high-stakes negotiations, in courtrooms where millions of dollars were on the line. I never thought I'd have to use it to survive a rejection from my own mother. My phone started buzzing on the passenger seat. I glanced at it, Margaret. I let it ring. It stopped, then started again immediately. Julian. I ignored that one too. Then a text from Patrick. Lol, where did you go? Mom said you stormed off like a drama queen. We need more ice, can you turn around and get some? I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the tears drying on my cheeks. Ice. They wanted me to buy ice. I had just driven 4 hours post-surgery, been told I was unwanted, and their immediate concern was that their cocktails were getting warm. A dry, bitter laugh bubbled up from my chest, turning into a cough that made me clutch my throat. It was absurd. It was grotesque. It was perfect. I looked at the notifications piling up. They weren't calling to apologize. They weren't calling to ask if I was okay driving alone in my condition. They were calling because my departure was an inconvenience to their logistics. I was the mule. I was the fixer. I was the bank. And when the bank walked out, they got annoyed. I put the car back in gear and continued the descent. The physical pain was still there, a dull, throbbing ache, but it was being rapidly overtaken by a cold, calculating clarity. For years, I had viewed my relationship with my family through the lens of a daughter seeking love. I had made excuses for them. Mom had a hard life. Julian is just finding himself. Patrick has potential. But as the miles put distance between me and that cabin, the lens shattered. I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like what I actually was, a senior estate attorney who specialized in asset protection and trust dissolutions. I thought about the trust, the Miller Family Living Trust that I had spent 6 months drafting 3 years ago. I remembered sitting at the dining room table, explaining the terms to them. I remembered their glazed eyes. They hadn't been listening to the clauses about grantor rights or revocable stipulations. They had only been listening to the parts about monthly stipends, property usage, and credit limits. They heard free money. They heard inheritance. They hadn't heard the most important part. They hadn't read the fine print because they never read the fine print. They assumed that because it was family, it was permanent. They assumed that because I was the doormat, I would never pull the rug. I merged onto the highway, the city lights twinkling in the distance. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Margaret. Don't you dare ignore me, Lauren. You are being incredibly selfish. Transfer the allowance for the catering before you sulk. We have a chef coming tomorrow night. Selfish. I reached over and turned the phone off completely. The silence that filled the car was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the hum of the engine and the turning of gears in my mind. They thought they held all the power because they held my heart hostage. They thought they could break me, spit on me, and then demand I pay for the privilege. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the magnitude of what I was about to do, you have to understand the history of the Miller family finances. Or rather, the lack thereof. My father was a wonderful man, but he was a terrible businessman. When he passed away 7 years ago, he left behind a mountain of debt that terrified my mother. Margaret had never worked a day in her life. She went from her father's house to my father's house, viewing money as something that simply appeared in her purse when she opened it. I was 27 then, just starting to make a name for myself at the firm. I had student loans, I was working 80-hour weeks, and I was grieving. But I didn't have time to grieve. I had to save. I sold Dad's business for parts to settle the creditors. I used my own savings, money I had put aside for a down payment on a condo to pay off the mortgage arrears on Margaret's house so she wouldn't be evicted. I consolidated everything. And then there were my brothers. Julian, 2 years older than me, was the eternal entrepreneur. He was 36 now, and his resume was a graveyard of failed ventures, a craft brewery that never brewed a drop, a crypto mining rig that only mined electricity bills, and now he was a lifestyle consultant, whatever that meant. He was charming, handsome, and completely allergic to actual labor. Margaret adored him. In her eyes, he was a visionary who was just unlucky. Patrick, 3 years younger, was different. He wasn't ambitious, he was inert. He spent his days gaming and his nights partying. He had dropped out of college twice, tuition paid by me, of course, and currently lived in the basement of the family home, contributing nothing but laundry and noise. For the last 7 years, I had subsidized their entire existence. I created the trust to give them structure. I put the assets I had salvaged and the new properties I had acquired, including the cabin, into it. I set up stipends so they wouldn't have to ask me for cash every week. I did it because I wanted them to be safe. I did it because I wanted them to be happy. And how did they repay me? With Julian, it was condescension. "You're too uptight, Lauren," he would say, sipping a scotch I paid for. "You need to learn to manifest abundance like I do." He drove a Range Rover leased through the trust, a car better than my own, and treated me like his personal accountant. With Patrick, it was indifference. He only spoke to me when his card was declined or when he needed a new console. "The Wi-Fi at the cabin sucks, fix it," was the last thing he said to me before today. And Margaret was the architect of it all. She pitted us against each other, always ensuring Julian and Patrick were on pedestals while I was in the pit. She criticized my clothes, my career, so boring, all that paperwork, and my lack of a husband. She took the security I provided and twisted it into an entitlement. She truly believed that she deserved my money simply because she existed, and that I owed it to her for raising me, even though I had effectively raised myself since I was 12. The antagonist of my life wasn't a stranger or a rival lawyer. It was the woman whose face I saw in the mirror every morning. I arrived back at my apartment around midnight. The silence of my own home was usually comforting, but tonight it felt cold. I walked into my home office, not even bothering to take off my coat. I sat down at my desk, the mahogany surface cool under my palms. I turned on my computer. The screens glowed to life, bathing the room in a soft, blue light. I logged into the secure portal for my law firm. Then, I navigated to the private client server. I opened the file labeled Miller Revocable Living Trust. I scrolled through the document, my eyes scanning the familiar legal jargon until I reached Article IV, Powers of the Trustee. The trustee, Lauren Miller, reserves the absolute right, at any time and without prior notice to any beneficiary, to amend, revoke, or dissolve this trust in whole or in part. The trustee maintains sole discretion over all disbursements and access to trust assets. I leaned back in my chair. The physical pain in my neck was throbbing, a sharp, biting reminder of the woman standing at the top of the stairs, holding her wine, telling me I wasn't wanted. I thought about Julian's new girlfriend, probably sleeping in the master suite on sheets I bought. I thought about Patrick, probably ordering late-night pizza on the emergency credit card. I thought about Margaret, probably telling them all how dramatic I was, laughing about how I'd be back in a week, begging for forgiveness with a check in my hand. They saw me as a resource, an endless, regenerating well of funds. They didn't see the person. They didn't see the daughter. I reached for my mouse. My finger hovered over the interface for the bank accounts linked to the trust. There were 4 checking accounts, 3 savings accounts, and 2 high-limit credit cards. I clicked on the primary checking account, the one that fed their debit cards. Balance, $42,500. I clicked Transfer Funds. Destination, L. Miller Holding LLC. Amount, all available funds. I confirmed the transfer. Next, the credit cards. Status, active. I click Suspend Account Reason, Lost Stolen. I watch the status change to frozen. Finally, the cabin. It was held in the trust's name. I opened the portal for the local real estate agent I worked with frequently, a shark of a woman named Brenda who had been asking me to list that property for years because the market was hot. I drafted a quick email. Brenda, you have the listing. Put it on the MLS to more. Al Morning, immediate vacancy required. Lockbox code is 4492. Price it to move. I hit send. I sat there in the dark, the only sound the hum of the computer fan. It was done. The trap was sprung. They were 4 hours away, in a house that was about to be sold, with cards that wouldn't work, and a bank account that read $0. I carefully touched the bandage on my neck. You said nobody wants me there, Mom, I whispered to the empty room. So I'm taking myself and everything that belongs to me away. I closed the laptop, walked to my bedroom, and for the first time in years, I slept without setting an alarm. The morning after I initiated the nuclear option, I woke up to a sensation I hadn't felt in years: silence. Not just the physical silence of my apartment, but a silence in my head. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety. Did I transfer Julian's allowance? Did I pay Mom's heating bill? Did Patrick get out of that parking ticket? Was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I made coffee, the expensive kind I usually saved for guests, and sat at my kitchen island. My phone was on the counter, face down. It had vibrated continuously through the night, a frantic heartbeat of notifications I refused to check. I wasn't just sulking, and I wasn't just hurting. I was preparing. I carried my coffee into my home office and logged back into the firm's secure server. Last night had been an emotional reaction. Today was about professional due diligence. If I was going to cut them off, I needed to know exactly what I was cutting off, and I needed to be ready for the legal backlash Julian would inevitably try to incite. He had friends who were lawyers, ambulance chasers and contract drafters he met at bars, and he would try to use them. I opened the detailed transaction history for the trust's operating account, specifically filtering for the last 12 months. I had been so busy with my own workload, my surgery preparation, and the general management of the estate's macro-level assets that I had let the micromanagement slide. I had set up auto-approvals for anything under $1,000 to save myself time. That was a mistake. I started scrolling through the miscellaneous expenses category. $850, Tech Haven Electronics, Patrick. $920, Elite Detail and Spa, Julian. $600, cash withdrawal, ATM casino floor. $990, cash withdrawal, ATM casino floor. I frowned. The withdrawals were structured. They were consistently just under the $1,000 alert threshold. I expanded the search to external transfers. There it was, a recurring monthly transfer of $4,500 to an LLC titled J&M Consulting. I didn't recognize the vendor. I pulled up the Secretary of State's business registry database on my second monitor and typed in the name. The search returned a hit immediately. J&M Consulting LLC, registered agent Julian Miller, manager Margaret Miller. I felt the blood drain from my face, replaced by a flush of heat that made my incision throb. They weren't just overspending on lifestyle perks. They were actively siphoning money out of the trust, money I had put there, into a private shell company I didn't have access to. I grabbed a legal pad and started writing. This wasn't just ingratitude anymore. This was embezzlement. As the trustee, I had a fiduciary duty to the trust itself, even if I was the grantor. By funneling money into a private LLC, they were technically defrauding the trust structure I had built to protect them from taxes. I needed help. I couldn't be the investigator and the victim at the same time. I picked up my landline, the one number they didn't call because they considered landlines archaic, and dialed David. David was a forensic accountant I worked with on high-net-worth divorces. He was expensive, cynical, and brilliant. "Lauren," he answered on the second ring. "It's Sunday. You're supposed to be recovering." "I need a full forensic audit, David," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hand. "Personal, my family's trust. I need you to look for piercing of the corporate veil, commingling of funds, and unauthorized restructuring." There was a pause on the line. David knew my family history. He knew how much I protected them. Did they finally cross the line? "They didn't just cross it," I said, looking at the J&M Consulting registration on my screen. "They erased it. I need everything you can find, David. Emails, text logs if we can subpoena them later, but start with the bank trails. I want to know where every cent of that $4,500 monthly transfer went." "I'm on it," he said. "I'll have a preliminary report by Tuesday." I hung up. The trap I had set last night was about to get a lot tighter. They thought they were just losing their allowance. They had no idea they were about to walk into a felony investigation. The first confrontation happened at 2:00 p.m. that Sunday. I finally turned my cell phone over. There were 42 missed calls. 27 texts. The most recent one was from Margaret. "Pick up the phone. We are embarrassed." I didn't call her back. I waited. I knew the cycle. She would call again in exactly 2 minutes. The phone buzzed. I swiped right and put it on speaker, setting it down on the mahogany desk as I continued to highlight line items on the bank statement. "Finally," Margaret's voice shrieked through the speaker, so loud it distorted. "Do you have any idea what just happened? We are at the vineyard for lunch and the card was declined." "Declined, Lauren, in front of the server, in front of Julian's girlfriend." "I know," I said calmly, marking a $200 charge for premium valet with a red pen. I froze them. The silence on the other end was absolute for 3 seconds. Then, the explosion. You what? Are you insane? You can't just freeze our money because you're having a temper tantrum about yesterday. We have a bill to pay, Lauren. Fix it immediately." "It's not your money, Margaret," I said. "I didn't use Mom. I couldn't. It's trust money, and the trust is under audit." "Audit? What are you talking about?" Julian's voice joined the call. He must have snatched the phone. "Stop playing lawyer, Lauren. Unfreeze the cards. We have a chef coming tonight, and I need to pick up the wine." "There is no chef, Julian," I said, leaning back in my chair. "And there is no wine. And while we're on the subject, maybe you can explain the $54,000 transferred to J&M Consulting over the last year." I heard a sharp intake of breath. It was faint, but it was there. That's a business investment," Julian stammered, his arrogance slipping for a fraction of a second. "Mom approved it. It's for legitimate consulting services provided to the estate." "I'm the trustee, Julian," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice I used to dismantle hostile witnesses. "I didn't approve it. And since I'm the sole grantor, unauthorized transfers to a beneficiary's private entity are classified as theft. I've handed the logs over to a forensic accountant." "You wouldn't," Margaret shouted, her voice trembling now. "We are your family, you ungrateful little. I raised you. I let you live in my house." "You kicked me out of my house yesterday," I corrected her. "You told me I wasn't wanted. You told me not to get comfortable. So I'm making sure I'm not comfortable, and I'm making sure you aren't either." Lauren, look, Julian tried a different tack, his voice turning oily and persuasive. Let's not overreact. We can talk about the consulting fee. It was just a way to manage tax liability. We were trying to help you. Help me, I laughed, a dry, harsh sound. You were stealing from me. The cards stay frozen. The stipend is canceled. And Julian, don't bother driving the Range Rover back. I've canceled the lease. The repo team has been notified of its location. You can't leave us here, Margaret screamed. We have no gas money, we have no food. You have the cabin, I said. For now, enjoy the leftovers. I ended the call. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a physical drumbeat of adrenaline. It was the first time in my life I had ever said no to them and meant it. It felt terrifying. But it also felt like taking the first breath of air after being underwater for 30 years. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in gaslighting and desperation. They didn't come home immediately. They couldn't. I learned later that they had barely enough gas to get down the mountain, so they stayed at the cabin, assuming I would crack. They thought it was a bluff. They thought if they waited me out, guilt would consume me, and I'd unlock the accounts. They bombarded me with emails. First, they were threatening, "We will sue you for breach of fiduciary duty." Then, they were bargaining, "Just release $5,000 so we can get home and we'll discuss the LLC." Finally, they were pleading, "Mom is sick. She needs her medication. How can you be so cruel?" I didn't reply to a single one. Instead, I forwarded every email to David, my forensic accountant, and my own legal counsel. David's report came back on the second Tuesday, and it was worse than I thought. It wasn't just the transfers to J&M Consulting. Julian had forged my signature on a loan application. He had tried to take out a second mortgage on my cabin, using the trust as collateral. He had failed only because the bank required a notarized identity verification, which he couldn't fake. But the attempt was documented. It was a felony, attempted mortgage fraud. I sat in my office, looking at the PDF of the application with my name scrawled in Julian's looping handwriting. This was the leverage. This was the nail in the coffin. I called Brenda, the real estate agent. "Is the listing ready?" I asked. "Photos are done, description is written. We're ready to go live on the MLS," Brenda said. "But Lauren are." "You sure?" the neighbors say. "Well, they say your family is still there. Their car hasn't moved." "Go live," I said, "and put the for sale sign up, today." "If they are on the property, it might be awkward," Brenda warned. "I'm sending a process server with the listing agent," I replied. "They are being served with a notice to vacate concurrently with the listing. If they interfere with the sale, I'll have the sheriff remove them for trespassing." "Okay," Brenda said, sounding both impressed and terrified. "It hits the market in an hour." The climax of their denial broke exactly 3 hours later. I was in a Zoom meeting with a client when my personal cell phone started vibrating so hard it rattled the desk. It was Margaret. I ignored it. Then Julian. Ignored. Then Patrick. Then a voicemail notification popped up. I finished my meeting, closed the laptop, and pressed play. It was Margaret. She wasn't just screaming. She sounded feral. "Lauren, there is a woman here. There is a woman here putting a sign in the yard. She says the house is for sale. She says we have to leave. What have you done? People are looking. The neighbors are watching. You humiliate me like this. After everything I've done for you? Get on the phone right now and tell this woman to leave or I will break every window in this house. You hear me? I will burn it down before I let you sell it." I saved the voicemail. Threat of destruction of property, another piece of evidence for the file. I dialed her back. She picked up on the first ring. "You witch, you evil, spiteful." "I'm recording this call, Margaret," I said, my voice icy calm. "And I have the voicemail you just left threatening arson. If you damage one shingle on that roof, I won't just sue you. I will press criminal charges." "You can't sell this house," she wailed. "It's the family home." "It's an asset of the trust," I corrected. A trust that is currently insolvent because Julian embezzled $54,000 from it. He didn't. I have the loan application, Mom. I cut her off. The one with my forged signature. I have the bank records. I have everything. I am holding a folder right now that contains enough evidence to put Julian in prison for 5 to 7 years for fraud and identity theft. The screaming stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the sudden, crushing weight of reality. You would send your brother to jail, she whispered. That depends on you, I said. You have 2 hours to pack your things and vacate the property. If you are still there when the realtor returns with the lockbox key, I hand the file to the district attorney. If you leave quietly and never ask me for a penny again, the file stays in my safe. Lauren, please, she sobbed, the fight finally draining out of her. We don't have anywhere to go. The cards don't work. Figure it out, I said. You're all adults. I'm done paying for people who don't want me. The eviction from the cabin was not the end. It was merely the change of venue for the final sentencing. They left, of course. They had no choice. Brenda, my real estate agent, later told me the details with a mix of horror and glee. She described how Margaret had thrown a crystal vase against the fireplace before storming out, and how Julian had tried to rip the "for sale" sign out of the ground, only to give up when he realized the ground was frozen solid. They drove back to the city in silence, in a car they no longer legally possessed, to a reality they were unprepared to face. But I knew them. I knew that fear would eventually turn back into entitlement. I knew that once they were back in their familiar environment, Margaret would spin a narrative where she was the victim of a mentally unstable daughter. She would try to rally the extended family. She would try to find a lawyer who would work on contingency to sue me for elder abuse or theft of estate. I had to close the loop. I had to make the separation legal, permanent, and ironclad. 2 days after they vacated the cabin, I sent a courier to Margaret's home. The envelope contained a single letter, drafted on my firm's letterhead, instructing them to appear at my office on Friday at 10:00 a.m. The subject line was simple: Settlement Conference regarding the matter of Julian Miller's fraud liability. I didn't invite them to my home. I invited them to my turf. Friday morning arrived with a gray, steel-heavy sky. My office was located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower downtown. It was a fortress of mahogany, leather, and silence, a world where outbursts were liabilities and emotions were evidence. I asked Robert, a senior partner and my mentor, to sit in on the meeting. I needed a witness, and I needed them to see that this wasn't a family squabble. It was a legal proceeding. "Are you sure you want to do this, Lauren?" Robert asked, adjusting his cufflinks as we sat at the head of the long confer. "NCE table. We can handle this via email. You don't have to see them." "I do," I said, smoothing the front of my blazer. The scar on my neck was healing, fading to a thin pink line, but I could still feel the phantom pressure of it. "I need them to see me. I need them to see that the person they broke doesn't exist anymore." The receptionist buzzed, "They're here." When they walked in, the air in the room shifted instantly. Margaret entered first, wearing a black dress as if she were attending a funeral, her face set in a mask of tragic martyrdom. Julian followed, looking haggard, his eyes darting nervously around the opulent room. Patrick trailed behind, looking at his phone, seemingly bored but clearly uncomfortable in his ill-fitting hoodie. They stopped when they saw Robert. "Who is this?" Margaret demanded, pointing a manicured finger at him. "I thought this was a family meeting. I didn't know you were bringing your colleagues." "This is a legal settlement, Margaret," I said, not standing up. "Robert is here to witness the signatures. Please sit." They sat. The distance between us across the wide marble table felt like a canyon. "We want the accounts unlocked," Julian started immediately, trying to muster some of his old bluster. "This joke has gone on long enough, Lauren. I have vendors calling me. It's embarrassing." "The accounts are closed," I said, sliding 3 thick binders across the table, one for each of them. "The trust is in the process of dissolution. The assets have been liquidated or transferred to my holding company to cover the debts you incurred. Margaret slammed her hand on the table. You can't do that. That money was left to us. Your father wanted us taken care of. My father wanted you safe, I corrected her, my voice steady. He didn't want you to be criminals, and that is what we are here to discuss today. I opened my own folder. In front of you is a document titled Mutual Release and Settlement Agreement. It outlines the terms of our separation. I'm not signing anything, Margaret spat. Then Julian goes to prison, I said. The room went dead silent. The hum of the building's HVAC system seemed to roar. I picked up the copy of the loan application. Exhibit A, I read aloud, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. Application for a secondary mortgage on the property known as the Lakeside Cabin. Applicant, Julian Miller. Cosigner, Lauren Miller. I looked up at Julian. He was pale, sweating profusely. I didn't sign this, Julian, I said. You traced my signature from a birthday card. The forensic handwriting analysis confirmed it. That is bank fraud. It is identity theft. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence. Mom told me to do it, Julian blurted out, his voice cracking. Margaret gasped, turning to him. I did no such thing, you liar. You said we needed the cash for the remodel, Julian shouted back, pointing at her. You said Lauren would never notice because she's too busy working. You said it was our money anyway. Stop, I said. The single word cut through their bickering like a knife. They both froze, looking at me. I don't care whose idea it was, I said. The signature is Julian's. The beneficiary of the funds was the LLC managed by Margaret. You are both liable. Patrick, I looked at my younger brother. You are the only one not currently facing felony charges, mostly because you're too lazy to commit complex fraud. But you have been using a stolen credit card for 3 weeks. I leaned forward. Here is the deal. You sign the agreement. The agreement states that you acknowledge the dissolution of the trust. You acknowledge that you have received all funds due to you. You agree to a permanent non-disparagement clause, meaning if you badmouth me to the family, to the neighbors, or on Facebook, I sue you for breach of contract. And finally, you agree to zero contact. No calls, no texts, no emails. If you show up at my home or my office, I file a restraining order. And if we sign, Margaret whispered, tears finally streaming down her face, tears of defeat, not manipulation. If you sign, I said, closing the folder, I shred the loan application. I don't file the police report. Julian stays free. Margaret looked at the document. She looked at Julian, who was trembling, his head in his hands. She looked at the luxury of the office, the power I held, the daughter she had thrown away. You really hate us, she said softly. No, Mom, I replied, feeling a strange, hollow peace. I don't hate you, I just don't need you. And for the first time, I'm realizing you never really needed me either. You just needed my wallet. Margaret picked up the pen. Her hand shook as she signed. She passed it to Julian. He signed without reading it, looking like he was about to be sick. Patrick signed last, shrugging as if he was signing a delivery receipt. Done, Robert said, pulling the documents toward him to notarize them. Get out, I said. They stood up. As they walked toward the glass doors, the facade of the perfect family crumbled completely. Margaret was sobbing audibly. Julian was yelling at her in a hushed whisper, blaming her for his ruin. They reached the lobby, where my assistant, Sarah, and 2 other associates were standing. Margaret stopped. She looked at me one last time, perhaps expecting me to crack, to offer them a ride, to give them a check for gas money. I just looked at her. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I just turned my chair back to the window, looking out at the city skyline. You can come, I heard her voice echo in my memory, but don't get comfortable. I heard the heavy glass doors click shut. They were gone. It has been 6 months since that meeting in the conference room. The silence that followed was deafening at first. For years, my life had been defined by their crises. Every phone ring used to trigger a spike of cortisol. Every email was a demand. When that stopped, I went through a strange period of withdrawal. I found myself checking my phone, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the screaming voicemail. But it never came. The threat of prison was the only language Julian understood, and the threat of poverty was the only thing that could silence Margaret. I sold the cabin. It went for $50,000 over the asking price to a nice couple from the city who wanted a place to retire. I didn't keep the money. It felt tainted, soaked in the memories of my rejection. I used the proceeds to pay off my own mortgage entirely, and I donated the rest, a significant sum, to a legal defense fund for elderly victims of financial abuse. It felt poetic. As for the family, the grapevine is a powerful thing. I haven't spoken to them, but in a small world, you hear things. Margaret had to sell the big house. Without the trust covering the property taxes and the maintenance costs, which were really just her shopping sprees, she couldn't afford the upkeep. She moved into a 2-bedroom condo on the other side of town. I heard she tells people I abandoned her in her time of need, but her friends have started to dwindle now that she can't host lavish parties. Julian's consulting firm dissolved. He's currently working as a sales associate at a car dealership. It's honest work, perhaps the first he's ever done. I hope it teaches him the value of $1, but I'm not holding my breath. Patrick finally had to get a job. He works at a tech repair shop. It's fitting. And me. I finally healed. The physical scar on my neck is barely visible now, just a faint white line that I no longer hide with scarves. But the internal healing was the real work. I started therapy. I started using my vacation days. I started saying no to clients who didn't respect my time. Last weekend, I went back to the mountains. Not to the cabin, but to a small, boutique hotel on the other side of the lake. I went alone. I sat on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, drinking tea, watching the sun set over the water. I thought about that moment on the steps. I thought about the cruelty of my mother's words. Nobody really wants you here. She was trying to hurt me. She was trying to make me feel small, to make me feel like I had no place in the world unless I purchased it. But as I watched the twilight settle over the pines, I realized she had accidentally given me the greatest gift of my life. By telling me I wasn't wanted, she gave me permission to leave. By rejecting me, she set me free from the obligation of trying to be accepted. I took a sip of my tea. The air was crisp and clean, my phone was silent. My bank account was mine, my future was mine. I wasn't wanted there, and thank God for that, because looking at the life I have now, a life of peace, of self-respect, of quiet mornings and stress-free nights, I realized something important. I didn't want to be there either.